everyone, and welcome to Teaching University. And today we're going to be discussing how we can get into effortless flow and enter these flow states where we're in the zone and so immersed in what it is that we're doing. And I think when after this lecture today, we'll see that entering these flow states is really where we get to really reach our higher creative selves, our authentic selves, and really where I think we are at our best, both physically and mentally, is when we enter these states. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today and how we can get into these states much more often without much effort. But before we do, I want you to make sure just to hit that subscribe button so you can watch all my lectures on personal growth, wealth building, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Notice that I gained thousands of viewers, but still not enough subscribers. So for those of you who visit my channel often but still haven't subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button. So I want to start with a quote from Mahaley Simmons and Hiley from his book Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experiences, who said, "The best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times, although such experiences can also be enjoyable if we have worked hard to attain them. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult or worthwhile. Optimal experience is thus something that we can make happen. For a child, it could be placing with trembling fingers the last block on a tower she has built, higher than any she has built so far. For a swimmer, it could be trying to beat his own record. For a violinist, mastering an intricate musical passage. For each person, there are thousands of opportunities, challenges to expand ourselves." So notice here what Mahaley is saying, that he's saying that the best moments in our lives are not when we're resting or relaxing, even though there's nothing wrong with recharging and taking time away from work and so forth. But ultimately, the best moments in our lives are when we are challenging and expanding ourselves. And as we'll refer to Abraham Maslow later on in the lecture in his hierarchy of needs, when we are experiencing our authentic selves, or we're expressing our authentic selves. And that is, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that is the pinnacle of human experience. When we're in this flow state, when we're present, we're in the present moment, we're not living or making decisions based on the disappointments in the past or worrying about some worst case scenario in the future. We are in the present moment. And when we're in the present moment, that's when we can enter these states more often, because we're less self-conscious and not indulging as much in these self-limiting beliefs. And that's when we're really expressing our authentic selves, when we enter these states. And that's when we're challenging ourselves and doing something worthwhile, where we're not just seeking happiness per se, but we're seeking meaning and purpose by challenging and expanding who we really are and becoming higher versions of ourselves. So Stephen Collar, in the book The Rise of Superman, Decoding the Science of the Ultimate Human Performance, great book, which I recommend, he says, "In the dark night of flow is an issue that society has not made particularly easy to handle. How many people have stopped playing guitar, writing poetry, or painting watercolors? Activities packed with flow triggers, because there are also activities that do not squarely fit into culturally acceptable responsibility categories, like career or children. How many, now grown up and done with childish things, have put away the surfboard, the skateboard, the whatever? How many have made the mistake of conflating the value of the vehicle that leads us to an experience, the surfboard, etc., with the value of the experience itself?" So what Collar is saying, I think Mahaley alluded to that in the quote from him in the previous slide, is that many of us unfortunately have abandoned our dreams and desires, because as we enter adulthood, we have responsibilities like career and children. Obviously, those are important. But when we repress our inner desires, or some of the dreams that we've held when we were younger, maybe not necessarily when we were children, but we were perhaps in our 20s and 30s and so forth, when we abandon these dreams and desires, we experience what Ralph Waldo Emerson says is living a quiet life of desperation, because we're not living our authentic lives, or expressing our authentic selves. We're not living the life that inspires us and that we're passionate about. And this is a subjective journey, because all of us each person has their own unique skills and passions and abilities. And all of us have different dreams. Not everyone wants to be a famous actor or entrepreneur or multimillionaire. There are people that want to be teachers, that like to go back to school, that want to work in a particular field, or perhaps want to have better relationships. We all have unique dreams and skill sets and passions. But when we suppress these flow triggers things that maybe we're passionate about, whether it's exercising or writing or poetry or creating music or even just going out and playing golf. When we do things that when we suppress the passions and desires that we have, that's when we experience these dark nights of the soul, where we really look within ourselves and realize that we are miserable and unhappy because we're suppressing the authentic self and living the opposite of what would be living an optimal life, where we could be entering these flow states more often. So again, Collar's saying that we need to put ourselves in positions that we can trigger flow much more often. And that's based on the activities that we engage in on a particular basis. And that's based on the habits that we have that can make that difference from between entering flow more often or being in states where we're distracted and scatterbrained and we're just not living our best life and not living optimally, whether it's in our career or personal lives. So Collar further adds, since flow is a fluid action state, making better decisions isn't enough. We also have to act on those decisions. The problem is fear, which stands between us and all actions. Yet our fears are grounded in self, time, and space. With our sense of self out of the way, we are liberated from doubt and insecurity. With time gone, there is no yesterday to regret or tomorrow to worry about. And when our sense of space disappears, so do physical consequences. When all three vanish at once, something far more incredible occurs. Our fear of death, that most fundamental of all fears, can no longer exist. Simply put, if you're infinite and temporal, you cannot die. And I've used this quote by Kotler in some of my other lectures because I think it's extremely powerful here. And we can analyze the beginning of the quote where he says that many of our fears are grounded in self, time, and space. This reminds me of referring to Maxwell Maltz's book, Psycho-Cybernetics, where he talks about the self-image and how many of us experience paralysis because of our obsession with the self-image, where we have these self-limiting beliefs about ourselves and that we don't act on our ideas because we don't have confidence that we can act out on them or achieve them, or that we don't believe in who we are. And again, our beliefs and how we perceive ourselves and the world around us, and our constant obsession with using our senses to worship at the altar of our circumstances, where we define our life solely by what we can see with our senses, then we deny us the opportunity to go within and channel the inner resources that we can't necessarily see at face value, but that are within us. That if we utilize these higher mental faculties, that's when really we can begin to overcome these self-limiting beliefs and challenges that we face internally and externally. And we can begin to enter these states much more often. And when it comes about fear, and again, Kotler interviewed many high-level athletes in his book, The Rise of Superman, from surfboarders and skydivers and skateboarders. Many of these athletes who risk serious injury, even death, when they perform. And many of these athletes describe how when they're performing, they enter these states of flow where they no longer experience fear. They don't even experience pain. And again, a lot of this has to do with the chemicals that are released when we enter these flow states, such as dopamine, serotonin, these other feel-good chemicals that are flushed into the body, where there's a physiological side effect of flow, where we really are just totally in the zone where our mind and body are one. But perhaps it's also the metaphysical in a way, that perhaps when we enter these states of flow, we're tapping into something that is beyond our understanding, an energy. And again, we can interpret God or the universe or whatever the way you want to describe it. But perhaps we're tapping into resources within ourselves and outside of us that we can't see but are there. And when we tap into them, that's when, in some ways, as these athletes even describe, they become godlike. And again, it's by focusing on going within and not being so overly analytical when we begin to act out on those ideas. And the more we act on our inspirations, that's when we can enter these states of flow. So to quote Norman Deutsch from the book, The Brain That Changes Itself, he says, one reason we can change our brains, again, we're talking about neuroplasticity here, which I think plays an important role in understanding flow. One reason we can change our brains simply by imagining is that, from a neuroscientific point of view, imagining an act and doing it are not as different as they sound. When people close their eyes and visualize a simple object, such as the letter A, the primary visual cortex lights up, just as it would if the subjects were actually looking at the letter. Brain scans show that in action and imagination, many of the same parts of the brain are activated. That is why visualizing can improve performance. So, what Norman Doidge is saying here is that the subconscious mind cannot know the difference between what is real or not. So, when it comes to flow, then visualizing, say if you're an athlete, visualizing how you're going to perform on the field before you actually perform can help prepare your mind for entering this flow state when you actually go out and perform on the field and compete. It doesn't necessarily have to apply to athletics. Simply, if you're, say, for preparing for a big speech or a pitch you're going to make to investors, for example, visualizing how you're going to perform, visualizing how that you're going to make a great speech or that you're going to get that money from investors. You're visualizing a positive outcome before it has actually materialized in your life, prepares the mind for the experience to occur. And it also reminds me of Neville Goddard and feeling is the secret, feeling as if the wish is fulfilled, visualizing as if what you want is already here. That's how powerful visualization is. And you can see how a lot of this material connects. Visualization, overcoming self-limiting beliefs, and flow. By entering these states and visualizing and feeling what you want is already here, you begin to reshift your focus from what you don't want to what you want. And that reshift of focus is extremely important because, as again from the quote and from the book The Brain That Changes Itself, is that by visualizing what you want, by acting as if what you want is already accomplished, that has profound psychological consequences and mental health consequences as well. By focusing on positive outcomes. And this is not necessarily easy, but when you're much more deliberate and moving in that direction and feeling as if what you want is already yours, then it's much more easier to get into these flow states, or you can prep your mind to trigger yourself to get into these flow states more often by visualizing and feeling as what you want is here now and that you'll perform in a positive way. And he further adds, Norman Doidge, that to reduce the effort whenever possible, the use of force is the opposite of awareness. Learning does not take place when we are straining. The principle should not be no pain, no gain. Rather, it should be of strain, no gain. Feldenkrais thought the use of willpower, which he obviously had plenty, was not helpful in developing awareness. I guess he was referring to an example in the book. But we could see here that force negates, and you can't force flow to occur. Or to put it another way, when it comes to goals and what we want to accomplish, we try to consciously force an outcome. We work harder, we work longer, we try to manipulate and force an outcome to occur. And in fact, the more we do this, the more we push away what it is that we want. And desire can be a double-edged sword. Desire is important for the creative process, but with intense desire, we also subconsciously acknowledge that what we want is not here. Thus, we can experience lack, and that the only way we're going to feel happy and joyful or be in a positive flow state is that we accomplish what it is that we want. So then, going back to the previous quote, I'm just going to go back here for a moment in terms of visualization. How important visualization is. To visualize and see what it is that you want as the wish is fulfilled, that your prayers have already been answered. By focusing and feeling how you want to be and what you want is already in your life, we can begin changing our lives and moving in a new direction, where we can begin the process of creating our own reality and changing our circumstances. And I think flow and being creators of our life go hand in hand, because I think to create the life that we want does require that we enter these states more often. Because if we're in states where we're distressed, anxious, or constantly living in survival, we can never prioritize focusing on things that would improve our lives. In the power of visualization here, and that we should not try to strain, we should become and embody what it is that we seek and express our authentic selves. So then I want to refer then to a chart, and this is from Mahaley's book, Flow, where to enter these flow states then, you notice these two extremes of boredom and anxiety. Boredom where Perhaps we're in a career that isn't fulfilling, or it's just not satisfying or challenging enough for us. Or maybe we're in a life where we just feel like we're not utilizing all of our abilities. Again, we're not being challenged. And then the other side is anxiety, where we're in a situation where we've bitten off more than we can chew. Maybe we're burning ourselves out. We're multitasking. Again, multitasking is the enemy of flow. We're trying to do too many things at the same time. And as a result, we overburden ourselves where, again, just like with the other extreme of boredom, we negate flow or we push it away. So to enter flow, then it requires striking a balance where we're engaged in activities that aren't too difficult, but are challenging enough where they push us to expand and grow. And remember what Mahaley says, that our best moments of life are not when we're necessarily resting, but when we are in these flow states, when we're engaged in activities that challenge ourselves. It could be from working on a project at work, to playing chess, to performing out in the field, or simply just exercising. Pushing ourselves a little bit each and every day and getting uncomfortable and taking some risks can help us put us more on a consistent basis to enter flow, where we're not bored, we're not anxious, we are in the present moment. And that's where I've always said, be in the present moment. That's where the magic happens. So Kotler says, finally, most people live in a very restricted circle of their potential being. They make use of a very small portion of their possible consciousness and of their soul's resources in general, much like a man who, out of his whole organism, should get into a habit of using and moving only his little finger. So, as I said before, Ralph Waldo Emerson, most people live quiet lives of desperation. Most people live very restricted lives. We have the monotonous routine of doing the same things over and over again every single day. And as a result, we end up living lives that are lackluster and have any sort of novelty to it. And we end up putting ourselves in positions where, as I said earlier in the lecture, that we deny ourselves the opportunity to pursue our passions and our desires, or at least incorporate them into our life in some way. Whether you like to bike ride or skateboard or play chess or read or write poems or create music. These things you should incorporate into your life, one way or the other. And by doing so, then, it puts you in a great position to trigger flow much more often. So then finally, Kotler says, I didn't come from a religious background. Growing up, everything was proof driven. If you couldn't see it, couldn't experience it, it didn't exist. But I've had experiences that bitch slapped me out of this lower order mentality. My need for proof, I've been given it. Now, if you want to tell me that God doesn't exist, well, now you have to prove that to me. So, really, so many of us worship at the altar of our circumstances. We've been taught since we were children. Seeing is believing, that we over-rely on our senses, that if we can't see something or have any validation that what we want is possible, some sort of evidence, then what we want or what we need doesn't exist or can't happen. But when we begin to visualize and see what we want and feel as if what we want is already here, when it becomes much more tangible in our minds, then over time it can be brought forth into our lives in some way. And by entering flow states, we're no longer concerned with our external environment. We are going within. And I think what Kotler also is saying or alluding to is that to change our external environment, then, it requires focusing on changing our internal world, our mental studio, and what we choose to visualize and think about, and what actions and habits we take that can help us move into flow much more often. And in some ways, as many of his athletes and interviewed say, when they enter these states, they feel God-like. And life, in some ways, becomes effortless. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you next class. Take care.